Hi there, I'm Max Brumberg-Kraus. I am a current master's student at United Theological Seminary of the Twin Cities, where I study theology and the arts and will be getting my master's in theology. I also work there in marketing and communications and events. And today I'm here to participate in the U of M's Decameron project. And my contribution to this really wonderful project are a couple of short stories by the Czech author Karel Čapek. Karel Čapek wrote in the first half of the 20th century, during the First World War, and between the World Wars, and he's most famous or influential, at least in the English language, in English literature, for the word robot, which comes from the Czech word for manual laborer. These short stories, however, I think capture the side of Čapek that is not always carried when we just think of him as the originator of a term. These stories are filled with whimsy and humor and strangeness, and so I hope you enjoy them. Right now I'm going to read The Five Loaves. What have I against him? I'll tell you plainly, neighbor. It's not that I have anything against his teaching. Not at all. I heard him preach once, and I tell you, I was within an inch of becoming one of his disciples myself. Why, I went home and said to my cousin, the harness maker, "Listen, you ought to hear him. I tell you, he's a prophet in his way. He says beautiful things and only what's true. Your heart turns right over inside of you. Why, my eyes filled with tears, and I'd have liked nothing better than to shut up my shop and follow him so as never to let him out of my sight. Give away all you have," he said, "and follow me. Love your neighbor. Help the poor. Forgive those who wrong you." Things like that. I'm just an ordinary baker. But when I listened to him, there was such a strange joy and pain within me. I don't know how to describe it. A kind of weight, so that I could have sunk to the ground and wept. And at the same time, I felt wonderful and light, as though everything had dropped from my shoulders, all my worries and trials. So I said to my cousin, "You blockhead, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. You never talk anything but low, money-grubbing gossip about how much people owe you and how you have to pay tithes and taxes and interest. You should have given everything you have to the poor. Leave your wife and children and follow him. And as for curing the sick and those possessed, I don't hold that against him either. Certainly it's strange and unnatural, but after all, everyone knows our own doctors are quacks and the Roman ones aren't any better. They take your money, all right, but when you call them in to a dying man, they just shrug their shoulders and say, 'You should have sent for me sooner.'" Sooner. My poor wife was hemorrhaging for 2 years before she died. I took her from doctor to doctor. You've no idea the money it cost. And none of them did her a bit of good. If he'd been going from city to city then, I would have fallen on my knees before him and said, "Lord, heal this woman!" And she would have touched his garment and been healed. The poor thing suffered so. I can't tell you, So I approve of his healing. The sick. The doctors cry out against it and say it's all fraud and trickery, and they would have liked to forbid him to do it, and I don't know what. But of course, there are all sorts of interests involved. The man who wants to help the poor and save the world always comes up against somebody's interests. You can't please everyone. It isn't possible. I say, let him heal them, and maybe even raise the dead. But that business with the 5 loaves, that was something he shouldn't have done. Speaking as a baker, I tell you, it was a great injustice to bakers. You haven't heard about the 5 loaves? I'm surprised at that. All the bakers are quite beside themselves about it. Well, it's said that a great multitude followed him to a desert place, and he healed their sick. And when it was evening, his disciples came to him, saying, "This is a desert place, and the time is now past. Send the multitude away, that they may go into the villages and buy themselves victuals." But he said to them, "They need not depart. Give ye them to eat." And they said unto him, "We have here but 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And he said, "Bring them hither to me." And he commanded the multitude to sit down on the grass, and took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, and looked up to heaven. He blessed it, and broke, and gave the loaves to his disciples, and the disciples to the multitude. And they did all eat, and were filled, and they took up the fragments that remained 12 baskets full. And they that had eaten were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. You know, neighbor, no baker can put up with that. How could he? If it became the custom for anyone who liked to feed 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 small fishes, what would become of bakers? Tell me that. It doesn't matter so much about the fishes. They grow of themselves in the water, and anyone who likes can catch them. But a baker must buy flour and firewood at a high price. He must employ an assistant and pay him wages. He must keep a shop. He must pay taxes and this and that. And by the time he's finished, he's glad if he has a few cents left over for himself, so that he needn't go begging. And he just looks up to heaven and has enough bread for 5 or I don't know how many thousand people. The flour doesn't cost him anything. He doesn't have to have wood carted long distances, no expenses, no work. Well, of course he can give the people bread for nothing. And he never thinks how he's depriving the bakers in the neighborhood of their hard-earned profits. I tell you, it's unfair competition, and he ought to be prevented from doing it. Let him pay taxes like us if he wants to run a bakery. People come to us and say, "What? You want an extortionate price like that for a wretched little loaf? You ought to give it for nothing like him. And what bread is it too, so folks say? White and light and fragrant, so that you can go on and on at it." We've had to bring down our prices as it is. I give you my word, we're selling below cost simply to avoid having to shut up shop. If it goes on like this, it'll be the end of the bakery business. I heard that in another place he fed 4,000 men, besides women and children, with 7 loaves and a few fishes. But that time they only took up 4 baskets of fragments, so perhaps his business isn't going so well. But he's finished us bakers for sure. And I tell you here and now, he only does it from enmity to bakers. The fishmongers are crying out against him too, but you know they ask outrageous prices for their fish. Theirs is not nearly such an honest trade as ours. Look here, neighbor, I'm only an old fellow, and I'm alone in the world. I've neither wife nor children, so what do I need? I told my assistant he could take on my bakery and run it by himself. I don't care about getting on. I tell you, I'd really like to give away the modest little bit of property I've got and follow him and cultivate love to my neighbor and all the things he preaches. But when I see the stand he is taking against bakers, I say to myself, no, you don't! As a baker, I see that it is not the redemption of the world, but absolute disaster for our business. I'm sorry, but I can't let him get away with it. It won't do. Of course, we lodged a complaint against him with Ananias and with the governor for interference with trade and for incitement and rebellion, but you know how long it takes to get the authorities to move. You know me, neighbor. I'm a peaceable man, and I don't seek a quarrel with anyone. But if he comes to Jerusalem, I shall stand in the street and shout, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Thanks for listening. The other two stories are The Footprint and Footprints. They're in the PDF below. And enjoy the rest of your day.